In the last video I said that id decided to incrementally improve their products in every way and make Rage a shooter where you run faster and jump higher and shoot straighter than what you're already used to. They also decided to write in a really solid story.
In the better games that Rage rips off, you at least have some kind of canonical goal connected to the storyline of your character, and the mechanics reflect that goal. In Fallout 3, you're trying to find your dad lost somewhere out there in the wasteland, and almost every element of the game is built to encourage exploration. Borderlands has you searching for this legendary vault of treasure with a few friends, and sharing large drops of loot is a central pillar of its gameplay. Rage doesn't have that kind of coherency. You're just a walking receptacle for other people's violent odd jobs. Despite being the bloody male power trip that is the first-person shooter, this story goes out of its way to establish your role as disoriented, weak, and vulnerable, and there's nothing you can do about that. So in the far-flung future of 2029, the United Government of Earth notices an asteroid headed its way and decides to lock up a few hundred people in underground vaults to preserve the species, which doesn't work because everyone in your vault except you dies of old age. You wake up after crashing back to Earth with no real goals, motivation, or direction, and immediately find out that a whole bunch of people managed to survive the apocalypse anyway without your stupid vault. So first quest is going to kill bandits because this guy tells you to. He locks you into his garage until you accept. Whole game is just driving to go kill things because other people tell you to. Something resembling a greater plot finally unfolds around 10 hours in when you move from a steampunky town to a cyberpunky town, and they introduce this Civil War setup with these two factions called the Authority and the Resistance. So you meet up with the Resistance and learn that the terribly engineered slopshod vaults that killed everyone on board also conditionally gave you superhuman nanotechnology powers, and that the Authority is looking to experiment on you for them. Since they're poorly constructed bad guys, they don't just ask you to sign a consent form and offer compensation to participate in their study, they just want to kill you for some reason.
This whole thing is so simple and shallow, but contradictory at the same time. The Authority is about as one-dimensional and evil as middle school poetry, and though the Resistance are supposed to be the good guys, they're manipulating and taking advantage of you in the same way that they threaten the Authority's gonna do.
So you learn that the Authority is hatching a big secret plan to open up all the other Ark vaults and use the survivors to create an army to wipe out the Resistance. So 15 minutes later, you sneak into their lair and use their hardware to manipulate the Ark survivors to follow the Resistance instead. And this is where the worst, most unapologetically and poorly written design decision shows itself. After making this change of scenery and taking the story to a place that is either creepily ironic or just accidentally stupid, the worst thing in the world happens. As you pull that switch, the game just stops. It ends!
No, fuck it. There are just too many things you can say about this ending. It comes after the longest, most drawn-out corridor crawl shooting gallery in the game, and you're just plowing through the same enemies that you did earlier. There's no final boss, no climatic showdown or escape sequence or melodramatic twists. The game just ends, right when they run out of ideas. But it's not like they didn't try. The last level is one of the most structurally sound shooting segments in the game, but it doesn't look like the writers knew that. The ending just comes out of nowhere.
And you know what? This is a problem that Doom avoided simply by having no story at all. Brilliant! You know, maybe this should be like a rule or something. Don't make a story-driven game if your story isn't very good. Rage doesn't just end when those credits roll, it dies, with no mention of any further sequels, spin-offs, or even downloadable content. During the 10 or so hours after the game's release, players experienced the whole life and death of this entire new IP. In fact, the most news the game has gotten after release was a public apology from John Carmack himself. This is a case of big-budget gaming gone wrong. Rage's high production budgets clashed with its weak creative direction, and id ended up making a weak, unfocused game as a result. Take the car combat, for instance. Rage is so all over the place that I can barely remember this car combat that I spent about a third of the game doing. After all, it's not like the car combat in Rage is nuanced enough to be twisted metal or anything. It's just kinda tacked on. It's polished and well developed, but not finely tuned enough to feel like the game really needs it as much as it flaunts it. In order to get to the next shooting gallery, you gotta drive to the next dot on the map, and there'll be other cars on the way that you gotta blow up. It's a time sink. It's not very rewarding or challenging, and occasionally it grinds the pacing to a halt. They lock off the next big chunk of overworld until you grind away at easy racing challenges in town to unlock whatever new kind of car is required to progress out in the overworld. And out there, the penalty for sucking at it is actually a bit of a reward. Blow your car up and you get to cheaply teleport back into town. Rage's first-person shooting also has this cyst of an RPG system bulging on the interface, with all these sub-menus and tables that you do looting and crafting stuff in. But there's no weight limits or role-playing systems to create any meaningful meaningful gameplay decisions about what you do in there. Like the card combat, it's tacked on and you don't really have to think about what you're doing. There's no reason not to spam the E button in front of everything and then click every button on your interface to craft up stuff that makes the game even easier. And don't think too hard, because these role-playing mechanics are about as logical as a soup sandwich. Oh look, I can grab the spray paint and sell it back in town for a profit. But not this computer. It's not like anyone in this game uses computers anyway.
Good thing this can of spray paint turned into small objects when I picked it up. I'd hate to actually think for myself about whether or not a can of spray paint is small. Hey, I just killed 5 dudes with 1 bullet. How's that for managing statistics?
Being a half-assed RPG also means that Rage has town hubs that you get side quests from, but calling them quests might be a bit of a misnomer. They're more like mini-games, or relay races, or reruns of dungeons you already did before. They just make busy work out of gameplay that you already have to do.
The game tries so hard to incentivize its most mundane play activities. Like this quest where the bartender gives you money for blowing up bandit cars that you're gonna blow up by the hundreds whether you accept it or not. Yay!
Side quests are usually pretty great. They have an important role to play in long-form adventure games like these. They're a chance for a big story to tell a smaller one and explore its universe from a different perspective. The writers can do something fun and unexpected with these things that the main arc doesn't get into, and it's usually new content. I mean, Zelda doesn't make you go back through dungeons you've already been through. If it did, it would suck, like Rage. And I can't just say no to this stuff. Side quests are supposed to be new content, but the optional content in Rage isn't that different from the required content, and it's such blatant length padding. Seriously, this stuff adds something like 20 hours of extra playtime to the game, but none of it's new. Next topic. Rage was also an opportunity to show off a new game engine. It's supposed to be one of those high-tech, ridiculously looking graphic demo games, but it all falls apart when you look at stuff up close. So the big pitch behind the tech of id's new engine was something called a mega texture, which organizes all of a level's textures into one big texture that's more easily streamed into your RAM depending on what you're looking at. Though we were shown trailers that made it look like the game would have tiny little flies that were as detailed as the whole environment, in the final game everything smaller than a fucking wall looks like it was ripped from YouTube, and a lot of standard features are suspiciously missing. Why are the birds so two-dimensional and fuzzy? Why is the texture popping so obvious? Why can't I shoot out any lights like in Splinter Cell from 10 years ago? Why are the levels totally static? Duke Nukem 3D had more interactivity in 1996. Why are there no moving lights and geometry shadows like in the last game id made 7 years ago? Why are the bushes 2D sprites? Why? I guess this is all because Rage is supposed to be really well optimized. It's all about compromising visual fidelity for smoother performance. Maybe that's why it's so blurry and static. It's because it's supposed to run on really crappy computers like this iPhone. But wait, something's really wrong with this idea.
These guys spent years of their life and millions of dollars making this cutting-edge tech demo of a game that's not supposed to look like a cutting-edge, high-tech tech demo of a game thing. I don't want to imply that visual fluff makes a good game, but Rage and Doom were both billed as showcases for new tech, and while Doom really did look like an incremental improvement at the time, Rage makes compromises. It nixes standard features and eats up 25 gigabytes of my hard drive.
Which means I have to delete a lot of my personal files.
I guess I just missed the days when shooters were really modular. Doom and Duke prioritized their weapons, enemies, and level design over context and story.
Look at the first batch of Doom games. They're all basically commercialized map packs. Same deal with Duke Nukem. When games do this nowadays, you guys hate it so much, but I guess playing Doom over and over again was tolerable because its core shooting mechanics were just so very, very strong. Levels were playfully designed and accentuated the strength of its shooting mechanics. Music, visuals, and even the story were wholly dedicated to complementing its grisly shooting action. It's just got so much replayability compared to Rage, and I can't see the game aging nearly as well as Doom did. The high quality behind Rage's gunplay could have been better utilized. Imagine if the whole game was structured like Time Splitters and just had you completing time-based challenges with these weapons that look and sound so great. A mode like that kind of exists in the co-op menu, which is nice, but it's a bit of a difficulty spike if you don't have a friend to play with, which you probably don't. In the campaign, all the shooty action is over in a pinch and contextual as hell. The game's fun is handicapped by design, but it didn't have to be. Maybe that's why it failed.
Sure, this is all speculation, but it's tested. Rage was a commercial failure, and they've been pretty quiet about the IP since.
Sales were modest, but apparently a whole lot less than id was expecting. The company has faced layoffs and cutbacks since Rage, and it reveals just how risky it is to make a big dumb shooter in today's market. But the thing is, this company used to excel at making big dumb shooters. Anyone who was on the internet in the late 90s probably remembers a time when everything id put out became the next big thing.
Got it. You guys want to play Doom?
But at some point after making Quake 3 in 1999, they kinda tapered off. I guess that's because it was the last time that John Carmack could realistically lead the game development process by himself. I mean, just look at the credit rolls for these old games. They're tiny. Shortly after Doom, Tom Hall and Romero left to make Daikatana and Facebook games. For Doom 3 and Rage, John Carmack handed off lead development duties to Tim Willits, a map maker who joined shortly after Doom's release. After Doom 3, Adrian Carmack left the company over a bitter lawsuit and left John Carmack by himself as the remaining founder of id Software. Seems like Carmack is more interested in hardware and coding these days than actual game design, and honestly, I can hardly blame him. He's still got an electrifying personality and clearly loves what he does, but whatever it is ain't what he used to do.
And if people want to draw polygons made out of vertexes containing fragments on there, hardware that's kind of built around that is going to outperform hardware of a more general purpose nature.
Sure.
Doom was a product of its time and place. It was the result of a dream team of a very small amount of people who all happened to have the same creative vision and happened to be working together at the right time and place. So now we're 20 years later, and their games hardly have the impact they used to. I guess this is what happens when a company gets old. They get fat and bloated, and they don't know what to do with their new resources, and they forget what made them successful in the first place. Rage credits hundreds more people than its predecessors, and it feels schizophrenic, unbalanced, and confused as a result. Like everyone who worked on it was picturing a different thing, and also like everyone who worked on it didn't try very hard to make the next big thing. It works, it's very playable, and you can tell that there's a lot of time and love that went into making it, which raises it above 90% of the crap out there. But there's also nothing particularly excellent about it. Maybe that's why it bombed.
Who knows? I just know that I'm out of $60 and wasn't very entertained. One might say I'm feeling a bit of rage.
Rip and tear, rip and tear, rip and tear, rip and tear your guts! You are huge! That means you have huge guts!